politics. We asked the opposition whether pairs could be provided for myself, the Health Minister, other House members of the National Security Committee, which meant that we'd be able to undertake that meeting uninterrupted. Sadly, that request was declined by the opposition, and they proceeded to go about their business, which resulted in 7 interruptions to that meeting today, at a time we were trying to plan for the impact of a global pandemic on the coronavirus. Well, they chose politics.
The opposition leader Anthony Albanese responded to Mr Morrison's comments on the virus. He spoke to Patricia Karvelis on Afternoon Briefing.
We have not sought to play politics with this. That's why the Prime Minister's statement is so extraordinary. He hasn't, after the decision was made, he hasn't sought to offer a briefing. He stood up after he shut down parliamentary question time and just said that this was going to occur. The opposition will receive a briefing, but it seems to us the initial statements that Chris Bowen has had inquiries is that this is pretty similar essentially to the announcement that was made, or maybe even identical to the announcement that was made on the 18th.
So you're saying there's nothing new in this?
Well, on the 18th, what they did was outline the plan. This is triggering it. I think it is right to be very cautious about the health of Australians, and we have said that we will support the advice of the Chief Medical Officer. I personally have received briefings. Chris Bowen receives briefings regularly as the Shadow Health Minister, and we have supported each and every action that has been recommended by the Chief Medical Officer.
The government is keeping the China travel ban in place, but the Prime Minister says we'll have to be realistic about efforts to stop the spread of the virus. Border Force is, of course, going to be doing patrols as well. Are you comfortable with this decision to maintain the ban?
Yes, if it is correct, and there's no reason for me to suggest it isn't, that we need to follow the advice.
Last year, Labor was calling on the government to stimulate the economy. Do you think we need economic stimulus right now in the wake of the coronavirus?
Well, what we said in June of last year was that stage 2 of the tax cuts should be brought forward. We said it then. We still think it now. We think that in terms of some of the infrastructure measures, it'd be nice if this government stopped pork barrelling and actually did infrastructure projects that will boost productivity and boost the economy. And we have maintained that position.
Anthony Albanese speaking to Patricia Karvelis. Australia could be one of the countries worst affected in the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak, as factories in China remain shut and millions of people are banned from travelling.
Importers have been the hardest hit, with many products from China either halted or delayed, while exporters are dealing with closed markets. Let's get more on this. We're joined by the Chief Executive of Roy Morgan Research, Michelle Levine. Michelle, thanks very much for talking to us this evening. It's been described as a double whammy for the Australian economy. First, the bushfires. Now we're seeing the effect of the coronavirus on businesses in general. What's your research found about how that is affecting those businesses?
Well, the survey that we did was of over 1,000 businesses, and we found that 1 in 6 had already been affected by the coronavirus, and this is in the middle of February. So it's definitely having an impact. And if you talk about a double whammy, I think it's even worse than that. You've already got a slight economic downturn. You've got all of the issues around wage fraud that are already closing many restaurants and businesses. Then you've got the bushfires, and now you've got the coronavirus. So there's a number of factors that are affecting all different parts of Australia.
How is it affecting them, particularly perhaps those smaller businesses where they've had to put people off?
Well, if we think about the coronavirus, it's actually not the tiny businesses that are so much affected. It's actually those people that have got more employees. But we're seeing a number of ways that it's affecting people. First of all, the quarantine means that there's a lot of people simply can't come to work. So anything that affects, students or workers, so they can't actually travel to work, is the first impact. Then, as you've already mentioned, importers and exporters. You've got people who are really dependent on China for parts or products or as a market, and that's a really big issue. Then the third area, which is probably not surprising, is the importance of Chinese tourists both coming here and planning their travel. So we've actually seen a downturn in tourism and a downturn in travel from, first of all, China and then Asia. Of course, can I just say the other really important point is the general malaise that you actually find, the general concern and the impact on how people feel, their confidence and business confidence. So that's one of those things that is really part of the world we're living in now that we think of as narrative economics. It's not so much what's happening, it's how we feel about it and what's being said about it that really impacts on markets and confidence.
Yeah, just on that point, obviously we've seen steep falls in the share market over this week.
Absolutely, yes.
So you're talking to that point of business confidence is therefore suffering, and that is also going to affect consumer confidence.
Absolutely. So our business confidence measure as of January, when the coronavirus was quite early in its phase, we saw the lowest business confidence for 9 years at just over 101. And consumer confidence, while it's not super low, it's still around about 108, hasn't shown the normal pickup that we see for consumers early in the year. Normally come January, consumers kind of come bouncing back after Christmas, feeling really positive. We've seen none of that coming through. So yes, there is a real impact on confidence.
And Michelle, this afternoon we heard from the Prime Minister he has extended that travel ban of foreigners entering Australia from China. What effect is that going to have, that continuing ban, at least for another week?
Look, I think people would be expecting that. I don't think that will come as a surprise to anyone. I have to say, as I say all the time, politicking is just not a good thing at the moment. So all the commentary about whether the Prime Minister did the right thing or didn't do the right thing or what the opposition says is not what people want to hear at the moment. I think people want to hear very clear guidelines as to what the government's doing, what the various government instrumentalities are doing, what they as consumers should be doing or thinking. A lot of clarity will be really helpful for the Australian public.
We've seen financial assistance announced in the wake of the bushfires. Have businesses been telling you that that will be required? If this continues, the effect of the coronavirus, will that be required, some government assistance for businesses affected?
Look, I think there's no question that some kind of stimulus will actually be needed. I think when we talk to businesses at the moment, what you've got is this very immediate response. Those businesses that have been affected have actually been affected to the extent they're thinking about what's going to happen today, what's going to happen tomorrow. For them, medium term is probably next week. And the kind of stimulus that I suppose a government can do is much more long term than that. You know, tax cuts is not going to help somebody this week. So I think most businesses are really looking at the very short term impact, and that's a tougher thing. I would also like to suggest that this is an opportunity for banks to actually step in. And in fact, banks can probably help any of their customers that have been impacted by making their life a little easier rather than, making interest rates more difficult for them immediately.
And Michelle, you talk about confidence and the effect that this is having on overall confidence in Australia at the moment. The government seems to be saying it's inevitable that a pandemic will eventually be declared. Once it is, assuming it is, what effect would that have? Would it make a large difference in people's mindsets, do you think?
I think the word pandemic kind of has a bit of a horror ring to it. However, really, it comes down to the way we talk about it, the way the government actually talks about what a pandemic means. I mean, there have been pandemics before. We've lived through these kinds of things before. The SARS virus was actually, more people died as a result of the SARS virus. These things occur, they're terrible, and then the effect, weakens and we move on. So I think what the people need to have this put into perspective, and I don't mean by that shut down and nobody talks about it, but I think as much clarity and sensible narrative as is possible will actually keep people feeling confident and able to go about their daily business.
Michelle Levine from Roy Morgan, thanks very much.
My pleasure.
He is the man behind the bushfire photo.